You've connected to Cisco Unplugged.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cisco Unplugged. I'm Dan Klamert, your host, and this week in episode 40, we're going to be talking about how we bring the home networking user experience to our campus networks with UDN Plus and WPN. So today I'd like to welcome back to the show Scott Clayton, our wireless SE in Virginia. How are you doing today, Scott? Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. So before we get going here, Scott, I just wanted to give a couple reminders to our users. If you do have questions today during the episode, as usual, we use Slido. You can access the Slido via the slides right now, or if you're on YouTube, watching on YouTube, you can see in the description below the Slido link and password to join the Slido and submit your questions. And we have people standing by to answer those, or like usual, also we have time, which we usually will, we'll interject and ask those questions live on the show today. So get those in. And also, just one more reminder, this episode is being recorded like usual as well, and is going to be posted on YouTube at youtube.com/@SymbolGetUnplugged. And we'd encourage you to go out there and like and subscribe so you are notified when we do go live with other great content like this. So before we get going here, I think that's all the reminders. Yeah, so let's get unplugged. Scott, could you please tell us a little bit more about how we bring the home networking user experience to our campus networks?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate the warm introduction there. So let's get started here. So as Dan mentioned, I think we can all probably agree that, our home networking experience, our user experience, is pretty good, right? I mean, for the most part, it's a fairly simple network. We have one or two SSIDs, no real VLANs out there. If I, want to share a song with my wife or my daughters, I can easily, send it to the Alexa that's sitting, in our kitchen, or if I want to play a video, I can pretty easily, send it to my video device, my TV, or whatever it may be. And all of it, for the most part, really, really works well. All our protocols work pretty well for doing that kind of stuff. Things like MDNS, Bonjour, et cetera, tend to work fairly easy. The challenge we run into is when we move into a campus environment, as Dan alluded to. Sometimes these things are a bit more challenging, right? I mean, so we have these shared networks out there. So think of a campus environment, whether it be a higher ed type network, or whether it be a multi-living location like a senior living, something like that. Generally, there's a couple different ways that we typically would see that, right? We can create a secure network, but a lot of ways it's going to be fairly complex. We can do things like multiple SSIDs. That becomes a problem with RF challenges, things like that. You can create multiple VLANs and put everybody in their own VLAN, but at some point after a certain number, the scaling becomes an issue there. So that generally, when we start looking at things like that for scaling this out to multiple locations or multiple people in a facility, that becomes a bit more of a challenge. The other way you can do this is to kind of keep things simple, but at that point it's fairly insecure, right? If I have everybody connect to a dorm SSID or to a cruise ship SSID, the challenge there is now everybody's connected to that same shared network. I have no real segmentation there. I can see everybody's Apple TV. I can see everybody's printer as an example. And so that becomes a problem, right? I can, somebody can easily share a video that I may not want to see on my TV, or maybe send print jobs, or when they go to, print something off on their from their device, they just end up seeing 1,000 printers out there, and it becomes a nightmare to figure that out. So that's ultimately what kind of WPN and UDN Plus are really kind of all about, trying to solve that particular problem. So this is really kind of the idea behind it, right? So what could we do, or what kind of solution could we offer to create this kind of shared segmentation within a shared environment? That's ultimately what WPN and UDN Plus do. And I'm going to dive into the details around this, but we actually partner with a company called called Splash Access, which we'll hear a little bit more from later on the session today, talking a bit about. But at the end of the day, that is really our portal to registering these devices, registering these keys that we're going to end up using that. And what ends up happening is as these devices join the network, they get put into their own UDN plus or WPN bubble, for lack of a better term there, that allows them to connect to that shared network, but have access to only their devices, not see their neighbors' devices as part of that. So really the idea here is creating that, as Dan mentioned earlier, creating that home-like experience within a campus network is ultimately the goal here. As we get into kind of the feature comparison here, and I'll go into more details around this, but I thought this was a good chart to kind of just list here, just so you can kind of see when we're starting to look at this. Well, really, the WPN solution takes into account our Meraki portfolio. So it requires the Meraki dashboard. It's going to have APs that are in Meraki mode, access to Splash Access, an example, and you can see some of the licensing requirements that are part of this. One thing to point out with the WPN solution, I'll go into again more detail around this in a minute. It does not require radius for it to work. So if you're looking for a simple solution, kind of an easy way to turn these kind of things up, the WPN solution on the Meraki platform is a great fit for that. On the other side with the UDN Plus, so if you are an on-prem customer who leverages 9800s today and things like Catalyst Center and ICE, that's where the UDN Plus kind of comes into play here, and that you can kind of see there. At the end of the day, the user experience, and we'll talk about this, and we'll see this a little bit later on today, is ultimately the same, right? The user is going to connect to the network. They're going to put in their pre-shared key, or however they're going to authenticate to the network, and at the end of the day, they're going to be put into their own bubble, whether it's WPN or whether it's UDN Plus. The mechanism is basically the same. Now, the way it works, sort of on the back end, is a little bit different, and that's what we'll spend the next 15 minutes kind of talking through. And then ultimately, like I said, this is kind of the experience here, right? So this is, effectively, whether you're a WPN customer or whether you're a UDN Plus customer, you go and register your devices via the Splash Access registration portal. That portal then either writes that key and that information directly to the Meraki dashboard or to Cisco ICE on the back end to allow those devices to connect in. So again, the registration, the user experience is basically the exact same regardless of that. And that's ultimately, when we came out with this UDN Plus solution, that was really the goal for this, was to have the user experience be the same regardless of how you were managing your access points, whether it be on-prem or whether it be cloud with Meraki. Okay, so let's dive into details here a little bit. I'm going to start with WPN. This is, again, on the Meraki or the cloud-based side of things. This is basically how this works. So if we look at the deep dive around WPN, this is what we're really going to be doing. So how do you typically make shared networks work, right? So a lot of times you can do this with 802.1x, with radius, logins. We can do dynamic VLAN assignments. As you can kind of see, it becomes, like we talked about earlier, it becomes a little bit complex around that. Also, you have devices that don't support 802.1x, especially thinking about a dorm type experience. A lot of the students are bringing their Xboxes, they're bringing their Alexas, they're bringing any number of kind of devices, Roku devices, those kind of things. And a lot of those don't support 802.1x. We needed a way to make that part of it work. The use of multiple SSIDs, like I talked about earlier, that becomes a RF nightmare, right? I think we all understand that. We want to keep the number of SSIDs to a minimum. If you've listened to any of the previous 39 episodes, I'm sure that's been hammered home as part of this Unplugged series. And that's ultimately what we want to do, is create that situation where we reduce the RF overhead. So we don't really want to have lots and lots of SSIDs out there for personal use. And then ultimately, like I said earlier, use a single SSID, one PSK. That leads to privacy concerns, security concerns. I now have access to all of my end user devices. So these are kind of going through the challenges we do run into when we look at shared network type examples. So how does IPSK without radius really come into play? And this is really the idea behind what WPN effectively does. So IPSK, if you aren't familiar with that term, is identity pre-shared key. It's basically, the idea here is to create a unique pre-shared key for each individual user on your network. Now, you can have a device, multiple devices that can register and use that same pre-shared key, but ultimately the difference here is that my pre-shared key is going to be different from my neighbor's pre-shared key. And that's how we're going to end up registering these devices and then segmenting them based on that. So the beauty with the IPSK solution, with the WPN solution, there is no MAC address pre-registration. I don't necessarily care what your MAC address is. Really what we're doing is we're keying off of that IPSK that you put in there. So whenever we create that IPSK within the Splash Access portal and it writes it to the Meraki dashboard, the WPN ID gets appended to that. So it's ultimately how we segment those individual users from each other. Is that if you use a particular IPSK, you're going to be put into your own bubble. If you use a different IPSK, you're going to be put into a different bubble as part of that. And that's ultimately how this all kind of comes together within WPN. So Under the hood itself, let's go into a little bit more detail around this. So WPN is loosely based on the UDN Plus feature set, which I'll go into in just a minute. That's really on the Catalyst side of things. WPN uses this 24-bit UDN ID. That's really the unique identifier that's going to be assigned to each WPN group. And again, excuse me, that is based on your IPSK key that gets put into that. There's a one-to-one mapping that exists between the IPSK and that WPN ID. Again, when you authenticate to the network with that particular IPSK, that WPN ID gets appended to each individual packet that you're going to send on the network. And that's kind of how this works. And again, subsequent clients connecting with that same IPSK key would be put in with the same UDN ID. And that's ultimately how we create that segmentation in there that says that these are my devices. I know that I have my laptop, I have my phone, and I have my printer in my room. They're all going to be using that same IPSK key, which then gives them the same UDN ID. And that's how we create that segment that says these are allowed to talk to each other, but they're not allowed to talk to my neighbor's devices down the hall. So let's talk a little bit more about how this really works. So basically what we do is we append that UDN ID into the what they call the GUE, the generic UDP encapsulation part of this packet. So effectively in the header that gets put into this, we're going to use that WPN ID gets appended in there. And effectively what happens is as the packets are routed to the network from one AP to another AP, they're going to look and see what that UDN ID is. Or that WPN ID in this particular case, and it's going to say whether or not that traffic is allowed. If that WPN ID matches from the source to the destination, we're going to allow that traffic to traverse. If the WPN ID does not match from the source to the destination, we're going to drop that packet. Now that's ultimately how all this kind of comes together. At the end of the day, that GUE encapsulated packet is only readable by the APs themselves. So everything just traverses across the network. There's nothing special needed on the wired side to make all this work. It's just one of the things that, as you can kind of see here in this picture, this is the Meraki magic that kind of comes into play to make all this happen. Okay, so let's talk through a quick example here of how this might work from a workflow perspective. So I've got a user here. This is Mia Davis. She's got her device that she wants to register. And this is sort of the workflow that she would go through to register that device on the network. So she's going to log into the Splash Access portal. It's a cloud-based portal that's sitting out there. She's going to use her campus credentials, whatever that may be, anything that's SAML 2.0, Azure AD, anything like that will be integrated directly into the Splash Access portal. Once she authenticates, she's going to basically be presented with her WPA2 password. This is her IPSK key, right? This is effectively what this is. She can also use that QR code to register that device if she wanted to do it that way. But she can see her WPA2 key. That's hers to use. What ends up happening then, is this is where the magic sort of comes into play, is that the Splash Access portal is going to write via API to the Meraki dashboard and tell Meraki dashboard, here is Mia Davis's device, here's the pre-shared key that she's going to use, and then we're going to pin that WPN ID for that. So effectively, here is her unique authentication mechanism. Any device that connects to that network, we're going to give it that WPN group ID. So now when Mia's laptop connects to that dorm SSID, again, a shared SSID, we're not creating a new SSID for this. This would just be your campus SSID or some generic SSID you might use. She's going to actually use her IPSK that's self-generated for her to allow that. And once she does that, the AP is going to send back, or the dashboard is going to send back to the AP and tell the AP that Mia's device is in WPN group 100. And that's how we're going to segment that Mia's device from other devices on the network. Let's take a look at another example here. So this is Emma. She's also as part of the campus. Let's say that Emma and Mia are next door neighbors, in their dorm. Emma comes on the campus. She's got her phone. She wants to register as well. She's going to go through the exact same process, right? She's going to go to that Splash Access portal. She's going to log in with her campus credentials. As part of that, she's going to then get her WPA2 password, her IPSK. Once she does that, we're going to write that information automatically to Meraki dashboard, so that the dashboard knows that this is the IPSK key that we're going to use for this. And then once she then authenticates to the network using her IPSK, which is different, you can see there's a dorm 456 in this particular case. We're going to actually tell it that this device is in WPN group 200. So effectively, what ends up happening now, as you can kind of see here, is I've got both Emma and Mia's devices are now connected to the network. They're both connected to the same SSID, that dorm SSID. I'm not creating anything unique for them, but they're using two different passwords to authenticate. So even though they're connected to the same network, same SSID, Mia's devices are using IPSK dorm 123, and Emma's devices are using dorm 456. By using those unique passwords, that's how we identify and say that these are part of WPN group 200 versus WPN group 100. If Mia's devices, for example, like her laptop, wanted to talk to that Apple TV, she would be able to do that, but she would not be able to talk to Emma's Apple TV or Emma's phone as part of this, even though they're on the same shared network. And that's ultimately kind of the magic that happens to make all this work in the WPN world.
Now, Scott,
Okay.
you mentioned campuses and dorms and things like that. So I'm assuming we have other use cases here, right? Too. So there's like, maybe potentially K-12s. What other customers potentially would see value in this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. I mean, really, any kind of environment that has segmentation needs within a shared network, either of these solutions would be a good fit. I mean, common scenarios we see, obviously the higher ed dorm example is probably the most common use case we have out there,
Sure.
but it's not the only one. We've seen this a lot with senior living. We think about where some of your moms or grandmothers and grandfathers live. Example, it may be a large apartment complex.
Yep.
There's requirements there for that. Hospitality, any kind of hoteling application potentially could be. Cruise ships is another example for this. So really anywhere where we kind of see like a lot of different people in a shared type environment, these are solutions to kind of create that segmentation as part of that.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no, great question there. All right, so let's talk about UDN Plus as part of this. So if you are somewhat familiar with the history of UDN, you'll probably notice that we're using Plus now as part of this. The solution has changed a bit, and I'll talk about how this has changed a little bit as we kind of go through this. So here's our example here. Again, I'm going to use a dorm shared network example, but again, it does not have to be a dorm. It could be really anything. Eddie's a student. He's come onto campus, right? He's maybe a freshman who's started his semester at Big State U, as example. Eddie wants to bring a lot of his devices to it, right? He wants to create that home network experience. And a lot of times our Big State U customers want to entice these students to have that home-like experience part of this. So Eddie has his Apple TV, he's got a printer, he's got a game console, the typical kind of stuff that a lot of college students are bringing to campus these days. Eddie's going to connect all those devices to that dorm SSID, but he's also going to be part of a network where everybody is really connected as well. So Eddie's going to connect to that dorm SSID. I've got it set up for a pre-share key. I've got it set up for .1x. For devices that can't connect to a .1x network, I can use a pre-share key for that. So Eddie's expectations in this world are that he can see only his devices, right? Kind of makes sense, right? I come from a home network where I can only see my devices. I don't see my neighbors' devices as part of that, even though they're on a different network. So my expectation is I only want to see my devices. I want to restrict others from seeing my devices too. I don't want to have somebody sharing a video in the middle of the night to my Apple TV just because they're part of the same dorm network that I am. So I want to make sure that I have some security as part of that too. And I want to be able to control too, right? I want to say, who can I allow to share to my devices, and can I control that as part of this? So those are, really my expectations as part of this. And same thing for Mary and John in this example. They've also come onto campus. They're new freshmen at Big State U in this example, and they've also brought their own devices. And they also have the same expectations when it comes to security, privacy, those kind of things. So let's talk about the original UDN solution. So this is where we were, and I just want to kind of give a little bit of history as part of this so you kind of understand what was happening. So when you looked at the original UDN solution, it worked with our on-prem components. So we had the Catalyst 9800, we had DNA Center, or now Catalyst Center. For those of you, ICE was part of this as well. There was a cloud UDN service that you would subscribe to that kind of helped automate a lot of these capabilities that were pushed down to the campus itself. We worked with Wave 2 access points. We have worked with SAML 2.0 gateways, Azure AD, whatever it may be, from an identity provider standpoint. Effectively, again, what would happen is you would, when a MAC address registered onto the network, a client registered on the network, we would assign that UDN ID, very similar to that WPN group ID. It's the same basic concept as part of it. It was a unique identifier for those particular users. We had some licensing requirements as part of this. I'll go ahead and build this out a little bit more. Show this too. So there was an app that the users could download. You could download it from the Google Play Store or from Apple Store. So you could actually register those devices before you got on the campus. It would talk to that cloud service. It would automatically create those devices onto the campus. So nice things about that were you could pre-register some of those things, but you can kind of see there's a lot of moving parts here, right? And that was ultimately sort of what we found as we started to roll this out with a number of customers that, the complexity of this ultimately was a bit of a challenge for most of our customers to be able to adopt.
Yeah, I was going to say this looks complex. So.
Yeah, exactly right. So
I know we're going in the right direction here, though.
Yeah, exactly right. So, one of the things we notice, obviously, right, we've been working with this company, Splash Access, for the last 12 plus years. They've been a Meraki-based partner for that bit of time. So, we said, okay, is there a way we can leverage this and work with Splash Access to kind of build out the Catalyst solution, right? We've already had it working on the Meraki side with our cloud-based solution. Can we also leverage the same capabilities for that? So that's ultimately what we came to, was this idea. Let's take Splash Access, take some of those complexities out of that original picture I just kind of showed you as part of that. Now let's compare and contrast with what we have today. So here's the UDN Plus solution, right, where we partner with Splash Access. You can see we're still leveraging our Cisco access points. We've still got the 9800 series controller. You can see some of the code requirements that are part of this. I've got ICE that's on the back end here that's doing my authentication. So nothing really complex here, right? I mean, typically anybody who has a on-prem based Catalyst solution for wireless is going to have most of these components as part of this. Yeah. Licensing requirements you can kind of see here, and I'll touch on this in a few minutes. And effectively, again, we use the API capabilities. I'll go ahead and build this out a little bit more so we can kind of see this out. So, we leverage the Splash Access portal to take really all of that stuff that was kind of sitting at the top, the cloud-based provider, the client solution, all of that kind of stuff gets really simplified when we work with Splash Access. So that device, that user registers their devices with the Splash Access portal, it writes via API down to ICE to create those records inside of ICE. And so when that client authenticates, you can kind of see in our example, we have Eddie and Mary, just kind of keeping our examples here going across. So whenever they connect to the network, their MAC address gets registered and that UDN ID gets applied. So I can now register. I know that Eddie's devices are part of UDN 25546. Again, doesn't really matter. That's all on the back end. Eddie never has to deal with that kind of thing. And Mary's devices are part of UDN 30074. The controller looks at that information and says, okay, this is how I'm going to create that segmentation. Say Eddie's device can only talk to Eddie's devices and Mary's devices can only talk to Mary's devices as part of. So that's ultimately how it all works together.
Yeah, Scott, this looks much easier. Now we have I know we have a live or a demonstration, I should say, later on here in the episode. So stay tuned here, but we do have a couple questions here, Scott, that are coming in via Slido. So the one is talking about longevity of the users and the segmentation. So it's specifically, how long does it last for when my users register? Are they able to stay isolated for a full year, like a full semester or full school year term, or will my users have to re-register?
That's a great question. So that's all customizable for this. So the short answer is they will stay registered in the network until that account is purged as part of this. Now, what Splash Access specifically does is they do work with a number of the dorm providers as an example. So a lot of people have ResNet software out there that allows devices or allows them to register user devices. So at the end of a semester, as an example, it can go through and automatically purge all the students who have graduated or maybe not coming back the following semester for whatever reason as part of that. But at the end of the day, it's all customizable as part of that, and you can actually set up timers to say, at the end of the semester, I want to go and purge all these accounts if I want to. So there's a number of different ways to kind of automate those capabilities. But very good question.
That's great. Yeah. So another one here was around licensing, and I think you covered it really quickly, but what license is required for the on-prem setup, and are 8540 controllers supported?
So great question there. So today the Cisco DNA Advantage is required for this. You kind of see we do require ICE Smart licensing as part of this too, and there is a Splash Access subscription. That one would be generally negotiated with Splash Access directly to make this happen. So there are some licensing things that need to be in place for this to happen. Unfortunately, the 8540 is not supported as part of this. We only support the UDN Plus solution on the 9800 iOS XE based platforms for controllers.
Okay, thanks. Speaking of controllers then, so will this work across multiple controllers, maybe for some of our larger customers? That's a common question we get.
It is, yeah, that's a very common question itself. So unfortunately, the answer to that is at the moment, no. It is defined to one controller. Today, it does not work across multiple controllers. So if you did have a situation where you had a campus controller and a dorm based controller, that's a pretty common scenario with most of our higher ed customers. A lot of times what we'll do is we'll roll out the UDN solution on the dorm-based controllers, and the campus
Sure.
controller can do other things. So the two do not merge together as part of that. It's a
Okay.
roadmap item for us to be able to support that, but as of
Okay.
today, we do not.
So just something to keep in mind here when you're planning and
Correct.
deploying.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly right. That's a
Another
very
one
good point.
here around, you mentioned a lot of these dorm customers. A lot of our dorm customers use the wall plate APs with ports for our students or residents. How does that work with our LAN ports, and is that even in play here?
Yep, it is in play here, and that is a very common question about. So it is supported so we do support the UDN Plus solution with our LAN port. So even if a user has plugged their Xbox into an RLAN port because they want to have wired access, as an example, the UDN Plus solution is supported across that. So we will tag that UDN device, the UDN ID to that device, even whether it's wireless or wired in an RLAN port. Now, if you're talking across, like if I'm plugging up to a switch, as an example, that's not part of the wireless network, that unfortunately is a roadmap item as well. It's not supported, but as long as they're plugging into an RLAN port on a dorm in-room type access point, that works just fine.
Okay. And then one more. This is kind of a crazy question, but can you hook up like a legacy VHS player and share that to, if you, let's say you want to watch the Cowboys last Super Bowl win? Is that something that this solution can support?
All right, we're going to move on, Dan. Thank you very much
Okay.
for that question.
All right.
Man, I always catch grief on this one. All right, so let's talk about the quick workflow here around this. So, and this kind of goes into some of the questions that Dan was just talking about here. But from a layer 2 security standpoint, on the UDN Plus solution, we support OpenSSID with MAC filtering. You can see pre-shared key MAC filtering, IPSK 802.1x. The key here too to remember is that I can actually have devices connected to, let's say, in a lot of higher ed campuses. Example, I'll have a .1x SSID that uses my my campus credentials to log in my device to support 802.1x. Gives me the encryption and things like that that a lot of times people want to have as part of that. But I also typically would have maybe a pre-shared key or IPSK based network for my devices that don't do that. I can actually have devices connected to both SSIDs. Like I can have my phone, as an example, or my iPad connected to the IPSK. I'm sorry, to the 802.1x SSID, and I can have my my Sonos devices or my Xbox connected to my IPSK. I can still support the WPN and the UDN capabilities even across multiple SSIDs in that scenario. We do also have some combinations with layer 3 security. So things like WebAuth, if you're doing that kind of thing. And then you can also see from an RLAN perspective, like we talked about a second ago, we do support the RLAN capabilities when it does it with the caveat down below. And then finally, just from a software recommendation standpoint, just to give you an idea. So, Catalyst Center is not required for the UDN Plus solution. We do recommend it for the visibility for some of the things as part of that, but it actually is not part of the workflow when it comes to this. But we do require ICE 3.1 patch 4 or later. From a 9800 series controller, what's supported today is 1713 and later on that. So you will need relatively new code for this. From an access point perspective, any of the Wave 2 access points and beyond that would be our X800 series. Access points and newer are all supported for this. The Splash Access is a cloud-based service. Nothing needs to be installed. On-prem for that to work is just done via cloud. And then from an identity provider, typically it's Azure AD. It's some sort of SAML connection. That's really just for the Splash Access portal to have have identity information for the users to be able to log in themselves. All
Hey,
right.
one more question here, a serious one, Scott. So you're a good sport. Thank you. So around MAC randomization, I think we addressed this with IPSK, and we're not really authenticating via MAC addresses, but I didn't want to skip this. It's a good question. So how does MAC randomization work with this solution?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So MAC randomization would be a challenge for UDN, anything that's going to require that MAC. So one of the things to kind of remember with MAC registration is that once a device connects to an SSID, that MAC randomization is turned off. So what we recommend in these cases is for the students to connect to the network, to that SSID, before they register those devices, or as part of the workflow, maybe recommend that the students turn off MAC randomization on their devices if it does support that. So that is a bit of a challenge, but a lot of times that's just kind of handled by the workflow, the help desk folks that are helping to kind of set up how this is done. But yeah, that is a potential challenge there.
Okay, cool. So thank you. So last week, I know we were in Las Vegas for our company meeting, and I know you had a chance to catch up with Tim Ormrod from Splash Access. So let's check out that video right now.
All right, welcome back, guys. We're here at Cisco GSX. I've got Tim Ormrod here from Splash Access. I assume a little bit warmer here in Vegas than it is back home?
Oh, amazingly warm. Amazingly warm.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Well, we just talked about the WPN and UDN solution here, and so I thought what I'd do is we'd go talk really quickly about Splash Access, some of the history of it, and maybe you can kind of introduce the company itself.
Okay, wonderful. Splash Access has been a Cisco Meraki technical partner now for 12 years. So we started working with Meraki in the very early days with captive portals. And the journey, it's moved on a lot over the past, certainly the past 4 years. And the implementation and the open up of the APIs has allowed people like me and our company to really push the boundaries. And IPSK, the WPN, is the fruit of our gains. We're super excited with some of the technology, super excited with working with Cisco and Cisco Meraki to develop these solutions.
That's awesome, and I assume you guys have been working with a lot of larger customers throughout the United States and the world, really.
All over the world. IPSK and WPN are solving people's problems in all different types of scenarios. We're solving problems certainly in education, but we're also in corporate access, MDU type deployments, assisted living type deployments. But education is certainly the sweet point.
Exactly right. So that's cool. All right, well, let's jump into it if you don't mind. Why don't we go through a quick demo of kind of how Splash works here?
Well, the demo we're showing you today is the IPSK WPN for Cisco Meraki. Obviously, we can also do IPSK and UDN on the Catalyst switches with ICE. So really important that we can do hybrid type solutions now, which is really cool. But the solution in front of us here is a standard portal. This is the page that students or users can come up to be able to auth into the system. Now, the really clever thing is that we've integrated this front-end system with the ability to connect into the identity providers. So we can integrate with SAML, Azure AD. Azure AD is the important
right, the big one, yeah.
Yeah, so we can do Azure ADFS or Azure AD and SAML 2.0. So we've got all the bases covered. So we can do the auth into the system, and more importantly on the back end, we can do the multi-factor authentication and integrate with different housing systems if need to pull back housing information. So it's a really simple front-end portal, and it was deliberately made to be simple, not to overcomplicate things, because we want the student to get online first time, every time, with absolute minimal support. And that's the big thing. Keep it simple, minimize the need for support tickets coming in, especially on that intake week. You all know what intake week's like in a university. It's madness, everybody's trying to get on, support tickets going in. One university, I'll not to mention the name, but they reduced their tickets by almost 85% on intake month, which is a phenomenal target.
Right.
So the page in front of you here is the page that the students would see. They would connect, and they would simply connect as if they were just logging onto a normal web page with their identity provider. This case is in with Azure AD. They authenticate into the system, and there they have their own page with their own individual WPA2 encryption key.
That's key, right?
Yeah, and this is where Meraki comes in with their magic, WPN. So the key is tagged with a WPN tag. And WPN, wireless private networks, it allows the user to encapsulate all the data, and inside Meraki's world, it creates a little virtual bubble. So what it means is they can stream to their TV, their laptop, their NAS drive, all their devices in their little world they can communicate with. but they won't be able to see outside of that.
Exactly
Yeah,
right,
so
yeah.
they won't be able to stream anything that they shouldn't be able to stream onto somebody else's TV. They can't print off that 5,000-page essay that they've just downloaded from the internet onto somebody else's printer. All that's gone now, and IPSK and WPN solves the problem and gets the student on first time, every time, in a secure manner.
It
Really
creates
cool.
their own personal bubble
Yeah.
inside of a shared network.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's a bit of magic, Meraki magic. We
Right.
call it Meraki magic.
For sure, absolutely.
And obviously on there we tried to simplify it. The user can go in, pull their own key off. It's exactly the same as that home away from home network.
Right.
They're in control. They can go in, if they've passed their key out to somebody else, they can change the key automatically, instantly. They can also go in and see who's using their key. So total flexibility. But instead of putting the emphasis on support, the student can do it themselves.
Now I notice there's a QR code here as well.
Yeah.
Is there any magic there?
There's lots of magic. The great thing is that what we tried to do, again, simplify the onboarding process. So if a student came in, they've created their key, they can actually copy that QR code or simply scan it with their phone. And it will put them on the correct SSID with the correct WPA2 key directly into the system without them having to do anything. Simple onboarding.
Right, exactly
Yeah.
right. And that's the key, right?
That's the key,
Yeah,
simplicity.
exactly right.
So the page itself is really straightforward, nothing overcomplicated. Obviously we've got some magic in the back end. But again, the great thing about Meraki is it allows us to add additional features. So one of the new features that we are working on, and you guys are going to be the first thing to see this, is that we're adding in now the ability to link in the sensors. So each student
cool.
in their dorm can have a sensor now. So we can have a door sensor or a temperature sensor or water sensor. And they're going to be able to set their own alerts within the system. So as well as getting the IPSK bubble and the home experience, they're going to be able to have now IoT sensors as if they're home as well. Really cool
Very
way
cool,
of adding
yeah.
things on.
Right, layering in, that's awesome.
So if we go into the back end, so obviously Meraki is maximizing, Splash Access is maximizing Cisco Meraki's API. The APIs that they allow us to connect to, it's an API first company. Everything they do on the portal, they allow us to do in the back end. So we can start building in these features and functions that allow us to solve the problems that everybody's been talking about. How can we get the users online, but how can we manage those users once they are online? Because that's the most important thing about Splash. We are managing the onboarding, but we're also managing the offboarding. So we can actually remove users when they've left the campus or left the dorm or the unit.
Which is super critical at the end of
yeah.
the semester or
Absolutely.
various times during the semester as well.
And this is where when you hook up to the housing system, something like Stargaze, for example, that's a prime one that we integrate with, we can pull back the housing information so we know what building they're in, how long they're in there for, so when it comes to the end of term, we can actually say, okay, we can automatically remove them from the system. So
Right.
we're not bloating the system or leaving users in who've left 2, 3, 4 years down the line.
Right, exactly right. And if we were integrating with an ICE system, a traditional on-prem Cisco system, we would just add those MAC addresses directly in?
Exactly that. It's exactly the same system. The front end of the system, it looks exactly the same. We've done a lot of work. We're excited about the UDN type of science, because it elevates Splash Access now. So we can actually have both systems working in par. And we have got campuses that have that situation where they've got Catalyst and they want to put Meraki in. So they might have 2 or 3 buildings on Catalyst and they're building and putting in Meraki at the same time. So with Splash in hybrid mode, we can actually do both at the same time.
Awesome.
And it would be a very similar experience, other than that the user on the Catalyst side would have to put in the endpoint rather than having to not put anything in other than the key.
Perfect. Very good. Well, anything else you want to show us here on the system, or is that?
Wow. I think the biggest thing about Splash Access is the flexibility. We've been working, like I said, for 12 years with Meraki. We know it inside out, and we're constantly adding on features and functions. But when we're starting talking about campuses, each campus that we work with or each customer we work with is slightly different. And this is where the flexibility of the system comes into play. We can do multiple networks, multiple organizations, multiple SSIDs, multiple group policies. We can attach them into one policy, one network, and then put them into a completely different one with the same key. So I think a lot of the functionality we built into the system is now getting really exciting.
That is awesome. Very, very good. Well, I'm sure that the next question most everybody's going to have after this is, hey, this has been fantastic. I've learned a lot here. How can I get a pilot set up? Are there any advice on how to do something along those lines?
We love to do POCs. We love to do pilots. We work with a lot of different companies and our people to do that. Obviously, the website, first port of call, just put in a quick form, a quick email on the website. That will come through to us, and we'll work with them. We'll get the demo in place.
As one who's helped out on a couple demos, it's very, very easy to set up, and Tim and his team are very, very receptive to helping out with a lot of that stuff. So thank you, Tim, for everything today.
Pleasure.
Anything else? And I think we'll wrap up from here.
Lovely. Thank you very much for your time.
Goodbye from Las Vegas.
Cheers.
And I know it was a busy week last week, and I appreciate you, Scott, and also Ian behind the scenes for tracking Tim down and getting that interview recorded. Appreciate that.
It was a team effort for sure.
So anything else? I think that's it. Anything else you want to say? I don't see any other questions, Scott.
Yeah, the only thing I have to say is if you do have that VHS tape with the Dallas Cowboys last Super Bowl win, I would love to take a look at it and just reminisce.
Okay, all right. I'll dust that off. All right, well, thank you very much, Scott. This was a great episode on UDN Plus and WPN. I think we all learned a lot. And so just want to remind everyone again to, as you go out to youtube.com/@GetUnplugged, like and subscribe. That helps the channel. It also helps you. You're notified then when we do post more great content out there online. If you want to reach out, if you have any questions, comments, any ideas for the show, you can always email us at getunplugged@cisco.com, or you can track us down on X, Twitter at unplugged80211, or Threads Unplugged Connectivity. So thanks again on a great episode, episode number 40 already in the books. Hard to believe. And until next time, stay connected and unplugged.